Yep. Speaker view
Oh.
or gallery view, either way.
Istanbul is in the house. Good morning, afternoon, evening to
Yeah, we have people from
all
around the world here.
I think I saw over 40 countries registered, Eric.
That's phenomenal.
Well, let's see. We are just past 10 now, 2 minutes after. We have 53 and counting. So why don't we go ahead and get started now?
Okay.
I'd like to give a real brief introduction. We have Donita Volkwijn with the Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors, right, Donita?
Yeah.
KM leader there, former student. Been connected for several years now, so it's just great to be doing more activity with Donita. And of course, John, CEO of STRATactical, a top KM consulting firm here in the Washington, D.C. area. And of course, one of our instructors for the CKM program, and he's a knowledge transfer expert as well. So he teaches our knowledge transfer certification. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to you two, and I'll be on standby to monitor activity, and I'll save all the chat and Q&A too, so we can use that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Eric. And yeah, it's great to be with KMI again. I did a number of courses with KMI, and this is, you know, once you're in the KMI world, once you're in the KM world, we pretty much claim you as our own. So yay. So yeah, we're going to get started right away. A few things that you may or may not have noticed already. For participants, you won't be able to see each other or hear each other, but you can talk to each other in the chat, and you can talk to us. If you'd like to chat only to John and me, you can send the chat to panelists. And if you want to send it to everyone, you can send it to panelists and participants. And if you have questions that come up during the presentation, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A, and we'll get to them as we are able to. And so we're starting off a little differently, I think, than a lot of presentations, because we're going to go straight into a video that we're going to ask you to watch. It's about 5 minutes, and it's from a program called The Crown. And in it, this is a scene where Prince Philip meets with the astronauts who landed on the moon, Buzz Aldrin, Michael Collins, and Neil Armstrong. And John, I think you have a little bit more set up, but I think that's pretty much what we're going to say. Oh,
Yeah.
we haven't got the video yet.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to hit play on the video. I'll also just say a quick hello from me. Nice to see you all, your names again, or to meet new names. I will hit play on the video, but as I hit play on the video, there's maybe 3 questions I might ask you, or Donita and I both ask you to have in the back of your mind as we hit play on this scene. One question is, if you were Prince Philip, what might you do differently as you watch this scene? So he's the husband of the Queen, and he's meeting with the astronauts exactly as Donita said. Just notice how the conversation goes, if you would be the same or different. So, you know, place yourself in his shoes. Maybe also consider placing yourself in the shoes of one of the astronauts, or even the astronauts as a group. Would you do anything differently if you were sitting in those shoes as part of this scene to shift the conversation or anything else? And then maybe our most important question is, we'd love for you to consider who's invited to this conversation, who's listening, who's in the room, literally, let alone figuratively. And is there anything you would do different in terms of who's part of the conversation and or not part of the conversation? So with that context and few questions for you, let me see if I can share my screen with video and hit play. Here we are. The Crown, Season 3, Episode 7, one of the 5-minute scenes. Ready, set, go. Pause there. Donita, back to you.
Yeah, so you might be wondering what just happened? Why are we just, a lot of things. So one of the things that we are missing a lot in today's world is silence, moments for reflection. So if we just take 30 seconds and at this point, I'd love to see your faces, but we can't. Think about what you saw, how it made you feel, what you're noticing in your own person in reaction to John and me, to that recording. But let's just take 30 seconds to sort of center and understand where we are right now.
And I'll hit the timer. Ready, set, go.
Great. So now that we've had that moment to reflect, to think about things, we've come up with an exercise, and John is going to explain it now.
Yeah, so here's what we're thinking. Again, like Donita is saying, it's so rare that we get a moment to pause. I would say even during a pandemic and protests and major change happening around the world. So yeah, that was a purposeful pause for 30 seconds. Now we want to do what would be breakout rooms. As you can imagine, we put you in small group conversations, but so lucky that where there's so many people interested in this conversation right now. In fact, we had over 40 countries register for this. So what we thought we would do to sort of make it as conversational as we could is a conversation with yourself. That was sort of the design we came up with. And we think it's worth 3 minutes this time. So building on that 30-second pause and reflection, I'll set a timer for 3 minutes, and we're wondering if use those 3 minutes however you'd like. You can check your email, you can multitask, you can do something else. But our offer to you is to take those 3 minutes, and exactly what I see some of you doing in the chat already, which is great. Reflect on that conversation. The question I might have for you is the same one we opened with, which is, what did you notice in that conversation? It seemed to me that Prince Philip was looking for a deep conversation with the astronauts, and it just didn't quite happen, whatever deep conversation means. And then he chose to end his questions rather than push further. And one other thing I might note, just to put a little bit of seed for you in this whole notion of conversational leadership, is not only was that such a movie scene, a TV show scene of opportunity for conversation, I might offer to you that even in this moment right now, every single conversation we're part of, living in this moment, has that kind of potential to it. So reflect on, for 3 minutes, that conversation. What did you notice? And is there any application for you as you think about your conversations and what Prince Philip did, the astronauts did, and who was or was not in the room? So yeah, 3 minutes.
One quick clarifying question, John, before you start the timer. Would we like people to share in the chat, or would we prefer them to reflect by themselves, or whatever is most comfortable?
Yeah, I would say wide open. If you're comfortable to throw it in the chat to panelists, or like Donita said, to all attendees, you're welcome to do it there. The Q&A is also open if it turns into a question for you. I guess personally, I might lean towards old pen and paper. So if you happen to have pen and paper, there's something magic about writing things down, but obviously you're welcome to take notes digitally on any device you have, or think. It's sort of a wide open 3 minutes of reflection. If that works, Donita, does that make sense?
Yep.
All right, I'll start the timer. Ready, set, go. All right, thank you. That's 3 minutes. So Donita, as you and I love to do, we dove straight into an exercise there as opposed to putting up a slide. So if everybody's here for conversational leadership, how would you relate this conversation, this reflection, to the whole field of conversational leadership?
Well, first of all, I'm loving what's happening in the chat, and it's the more you think about some things, the more it becomes apparent. And I mean, yeah, we chose something from a TV show, so it's obviously actors, but I was very easily able to relate that conversation to conversations that I've had myself, or to conversations in which I've been left out. But if we want to talk about conversational leadership, I mean, like, okay, so it's two words, conversation and leadership. Why do we need to practice it? I mean, we converse every single day in whatever format, if it's two people talking to each other, if it's through Zoom, if it's through sign language or singing or looking at a piece of art. We all think we know how to converse. And as far as leadership is concerned, some of us feel like leaders already. Others of us are like, well, this is why I came to this webinar, because I would love to know how to be a better leader. Why are you showing me TV clips? But conversation, I think, is, with technology, it seems like we have more and different opportunities to converse with each other. But the question for me, and I think for John as well, is new technology actually limiting how much we can connect with each other? And by connecting, meaning that, you know, often when I'm in a room with someone else, there are moments of uncomfortable silence, but there are also moments of just silence of camaraderie. It's really hard to get on FaceTime or Zoom and just sit with each other. I think some people have managed to do that. But it's about thinking, I think there's a dissatisfaction sometimes in the conversations that we're having these days. And that's where this conversational leadership came out of, like, what the issue that we're trying to address is, why do I feel so unsatisfied when I'm doing something that I do every day?
Is there an opportunity, right? If there's some dissatisfaction, do we resist that? Do we want to lessen it? And I guess what we've spent a lot of time, or in fact, I know what we spent a lot of time in this brand new field, right? We've got knowledge management around since the mid-90s or so. Nancy Dixon writes beautifully those three eras of knowledge management, starting with information management, adding in experience management, now sort of idea and collective organizational learning type knowledge management. Are we due? Are we due for a fourth era of knowledge management, knowing that all of you connected in through the Knowledge Management Institute? We offer to you that yes, it is time for a fourth era, and maybe that era is taking all this, optimizing the flow of information and optimizing the flow of knowledge, and now saying, it looks like we did a lot of that through technology and documenting explicit knowledge stuff, but what about all that tacit stuff that, you know, KMI is so proud of, and, you know, the whole certification quite focuses on the tacit knowledge. What if we were even more skilled at the conversational delivery of that tacit knowledge for the purposes of making connections, or for the purpose of building trust, or the one that does seem to be jumping out at us so much in conversational leadership is to make sense or to make meaning out of this thing called life? What if all this stuff we're doing in organizations is really about making meaning and making sense? You know, in knowledge management, we talk so much about better or faster decisions. Sure, that's also done through conversation, right? So just as Donita said, it seems so obvious that I have conversations every day. I may or may not ever have been taught how to have conversations. We think there's something there. We think there's an emerging field that we'd really like to shine a bright light on. Happen to call it conversational leadership right now, and see where it goes.
And the other part for us is, you know, how are we underestimating what we can do with conversation? Because I don't know about you guys, but when I'm doing a presentation, I will often practice in the mirror, right? To make sure that I can take my ums out, or to make sure that there's a thread there. And that's a conversation, that's a one-to-many conversation that we would be doing. I've also discovered that if I have an important conversation coming up in my personal or professional life, I start to practice it as well. And what if there were tools that we could use that could allow us to take full advantage of the possibilities and opportunities within a conversation?
So what if we bring it into right now, this moment? We're all sitting in Zoom, virtually connected to each other. A friend of ours, Catherine Woods, often uses this quote, am I in a meeting or am I being met? Or are we in a meeting or are we being met? What does that being met look like, feel like? What senses go on for you? And let's also bring in the reason we're sort of on Zoom and virtually connected, right? The pandemic, Black Lives Matter, protests, politics, the sort of things that are going on around us in the world right now. What if the conversations were more sense-making, more meaning-making, more skilled, more depth, more present in our moment and applied to the situation that we find ourselves in? So Donita, what have we done about it?
So, you know, if what we're talking about, if that clip of a TV show sort of resonated with you in your own life, personal or professional, or both, what would it look like if there were ways to sort of figure out what we needed from a conversation? And John and David Gertine and I have been working on this conversational leadership framework that is trying to address ways of not manipulating a conversation, because nobody wants to be manipulated and people feel a manipulation, but to sit down and think about how you would like a conversation to go. It is, and to leave it open for opportunities in a shift in conversation. I saw that in the chat that, you know, being able to seize the moment, read a room or read the Zoom is really important, because if somebody else mentioned in the chat, if you're coming in with two different agendas, it's going to take very valuable time to shift to where you're both on the same page. So taking a look at this framework, we think that there's real promise in this, how we're going to design things in the future. And it is going to be a potential, as John said, new line for knowledge management. And I see it as potential, like you start with conversational leadership and then you go into some of the other aspects of knowledge management. So we have context, purpose, enablers, and design. And John is going to go a little bit more in depth about what they mean, what the questions are that we can ask each other and ourselves.
Yeah, I'll start with context and purpose in the upper right-hand corner. A couple of context things, not only the context you see on screen, but context for this framework. We've had some good laughs to ourselves as we do this, because conversations by definition are complex. And so trying to create a framework, trying to map out complexity, I'm hoping most of you can get a smile or a giggle that you can't really map complexity. It emerges, it moves, it's dynamic. It's almost a futile effort to try and map it. And yet, as we have those conversations and try to map it, there seems to be tremendous value in sort of guiding conversations with a bit of framework. The other context, before I ask those two questions at the top, you've seen these other books, right? You've seen other conversational approaches. Our favorite is Crucial Conversations. Amazing book, amazing framework, fantastic way to have crucial conversations. But what about informal conversations? What about chit chat? What about decision-making conversations? What about the other conversations that aren't crucial? We want to include those. What about books like Dealing with Difficult People or Getting to Yes? You know, influential, motivational type conversations. Again, fantastic. We're trying to say that maybe there's a way to look at every little conversation and every big conversation that you're a part of. So everything then fits into conversational leadership in that way. So what we've come up with is context and purpose of the field of conversational leadership. The context is, in what situation do we find ourselves? There's so many other questions we have, and they're in a more detailed version of the framework. This is sort of the highest level of it. So are you aware of what situation we find ourselves? I would say Prince Philip and the astronauts were not aware of their situation. Prince Philip was not aware of himself being in the middle of a midlife passage, looking for deeper meaning in life. The astronauts may or may not have been aware of that as well. And then Prince Philip not being so aware of what the group dynamic was of the astronauts and where they were coming, the context of the situation. Other than the obvious, we're meeting at Buckingham Castle Palace. This is a one-time special opportunity. They had sort of that aspect of the context, but there's so much more in the context of the situation and the conversation. And then purpose. What is the purpose of this conversation right now? And I guess it sounds so obvious. It sounds like strategic planning. It sounds like, of course, we need a vision and a purpose and an objective. It almost sounds like you're taking the magic out of the conversation. And in a way, maybe that's true. I guess what we're trying to say in conversational leadership is, have you even started the conversation about the purpose rather than just diving right in and then being frustrated, or I think like Donita was saying, less satisfaction, because it was an undiscussable. We weren't allowed to talk about the purpose. It felt like a waste of time. We just needed to, get the conversation over with. We think both that context and purpose is underutilized and missed, and lack of awareness in, at least for me personally, most conversations that I'm a part of. Donita, how about design and enablers?
Yeah, so and just a little bit on that context and purpose. There's like, how many times have you gone into a meeting with someone that's been on the calendar, it's a recurring meeting, and one of you or somebody in the room says, okay, why are we here? What a missed opportunity to think about for 5 minutes ahead of time. What is this? Is this a knowledge transfer meeting? Is this a consensus making meeting? Is this a brainstorming meeting? Is this a decision making meeting? 4 things to ask yourself, so that when you go into the meeting, there's already a purpose that's defined. There's already an agenda. And then looking at enablers, what do I have in my skill set to guide the conversation? And I will reiterate, because somebody said in the chat, this is not about manipulation. This is about purposeful, intentional design of the myriad opportunities for a conversation. Like, to say up front, my understanding is that we're going to be making a decision in this meeting. Is that true for you? Is that your understanding? So coming in with simple tools, like the very practical ones, like, is this a Zoom meeting? Is it in person? Do I need audio visual help? Do I need to have a pens and paper? Or do I need to have stickies? All of that stuff is really practical. But then there's also the self part. What if we looked at our own selves and looked at our skill sets and having a conversation? Am I in the right mindset to have this conversation, especially if it's a difficult one? Am I honoring the other people in the room by being willing to be that benign authority to say, this is how I propose the conversation goes. If someone else would like it to go differently, please speak up. And also taking stock of how we come into a conversation. I am someone who, I'm an introvert by preference, and it manifests itself very differently. If there's a vacuum, I try to fill it. But knowing that I can sometimes be nervous and want to jump into a silence has been very helpful for me to know, because I then am able to say, okay, be comfortable in discomfort for 10 seconds. If after 10 seconds something doesn't, nobody's saying anything, then you can say something. But knowledge of self, understanding what we bring, what the potential is for us to bring into a conversation, is just such an important thing. So looking at actual practical physical enablers, but also looking at what those tacit enablers are. And then the design, again, going back into, you know, if I have difficult information to impart to someone, how do I do that with grace? How do I invite that person to, like, not necessarily having to answer in the moment, but giving space for that person to go away and think about things and then come back to me. There are all sorts of tools that we can use to take conversation to a level that is, once again, transformative and connected.
So as Donita's saying there, we've got these 4 areas: context, purpose, design, enablers, and so much more detail underneath them. A quick webinar here. Hopefully that begins to excite and make some sense, and hopefully a lot of it you've already thought about, and now it's sort of just kind of coming together in one picture here. Donita talked about self, and I'll just add a little bit more about self and then hand it back to Donita for this new word, communityship. So I'm actually thinking this is quite a bit. We're talking at you. We, of course, wish this was more conversational, because isn't it ironic that talking about conversation and Donita and I will have a bit of a conversation in front of you, but hey, here we are. So self, in knowledge management, many of you will have heard me say that one of our partner fields is organization development, OD. And in OD, they're really interested and skilled in group dynamics and revealing the system to itself and helping systems become self-organizing, that kind of work. One of their core beliefs and practices in OD is use of self, or self as an instrument. It's just like if you're a musician and you're learning to play, like trumpet or some instrument. You have to learn the instrument. You have to learn the valves and how it works, and 10,000 hours of practice, that kind of thing, to become skilled at the instrument. Our instrument in knowledge management is our body. Our instrument in conversation is our body. It's our 5 plus 1 or 2 other senses. How practiced, I'll just speak for myself. I have had tremendous support and professional help in becoming aware of myself. And here's the old quote, the paradoxical theory of change I would offer here. It says, real change begins when you become not who you want to be, but who you are. Real change begins when you stop being who you want to be and start being who you are. That's the paradox. That's the who am I, and where is that coming from, and what am I aware of? What am I bringing into this conversation that is my true need and my true, authentic, unmasked self? And or I'm wearing a mask. I'm wearing a certain set of behaviors for this conversation, and I'm aware of it, and it's purposeful and intentional, and that's it's here in the conversation with me. So self as an instrument, and the practice it takes to be aware of self in constant tension with communityship. What do we mean by that new word, Donita?
So, the title of this is Conversational Leadership, and now we're talking about communityship. John, we had a please post the verbiage again request. So communityship, we've been trying to change the word, the context and the connotation of leadership and leader for decades, right? The way I think of true leadership is leading together, but in the zeitgeist, we can't get away from one person as a leader and everyone else as a follower, and this hierarchical structure. So with communityship, it's about being able to act as a community and being leaders within that community. And that is a really, it's where like some of the most exciting and difficult things can happen, because we're always taught that you have to grasp leadership. You have to take it. It's yours for the taking. rather than one of the most important questions I've ever been asked in my professional life was, how do you stand in the way of other people's leadership? And it meant so much to me because it gave me agency to say, oh, you know, I guess I have the power to stand in somebody else's way. But if we are only listening to one person at a time, do we have the ability to listen to the community? Because there's leadership in all of us. And if we open up the possibilities for leadership in the entire community, how does that change the paradigm of your household, your organization, your city, you know? Because not all great ideas come from the very top if we're still talking hierarchy. And so that's where I get most excited about this idea of communityship, of everybody stepping into themselves, being present, being in the moment, and being able, and all of that comes behind it too. Having the agency, having the support, having the resources to be able to step into self. What does that look like? What tools do we need to get there?
So let's try another exercise. Best we can for conversation here in the moment. Let's do another 3-minute journaling exercise. And here's what I'm going to pull up on screen. These are the 3 core questions that we've come up with so far, and love for you to put it in chat, love for you to join conversationalleadership.net as an online site to continue this. We find these to be the 3 questions for conversational leaders to always be aware of in every conversation. And we're trying to keep it simple because there are so many more that keep popping up for us. But what if we right now have you, close your eyes or think for a moment or grab your pen and paper or your phone or wherever. Let's just look at that very first question. Are we having the conversation we need to be having right now? The we is important there because it is checking in on you have your needs for your conversation right now. The group you're speaking with, each person has their needs. We're talking about those and the group level conversation. You know what I mean by this, right? I don't need to be so covert about race relations in the United States and around the world. What is that conversation? There's something there. Now, that's one example. Here's the journaling question for you for 3 minutes here. What is the conversation that you are compelled to join right now? I'll type it here in the chat too. What's the conversation that you are compelled to join right now? 3 minutes of contemplation and reflection and sensing. Ready, set, go. All right, that's 3 minutes. Donita, over to you.
Right, so hopefully you've written down, thought about, identified the conversations that we need to be having right now. And that in itself has given you a moment of reflection. Maybe it's made you a little sweaty, a little nervous about what needs to happen. So that leads into the second question, which is, what do you need in order to have that conversation? For yourself, for the space. It could be as simple as I need a better broadband connection. For me, it can be as complicated as the fact that I am a woman of color and I am often not able to get into the conversation that I need to be having. And I don't want to have to rely on someone else to get me into the conversation, but often that's out of my control. So I know the conversations that I need to have. but I'm not sure that I can always get into the conversations that I need to. So what would you need to get into the conversation that you need to have? Do you need a third party, a facilitator, a mediator? Do you need to sit down and like plot out your speaking points? Do you need to say to somebody, hey, I've thought about something that you said a couple of weeks ago, and I'd love to have a discussion. Can you tell me when a good time is? All of those things, just think about what do you need in order to get into the conversation that you need to be having right now. So John, if you can set the timer again for 3 minutes and add any context.
Works for me. Ready, set, go. 3 minutes. All right, so there's 3 minutes back to back. I'm always fascinated to hear what's going on for people as they experience those multiple sets of 3 minutes and this content of conversational leadership. We're just a couple minutes behind, Donita. We were hoping to have 10 minutes for Q&A, but I think we've still got a good 7 or 8 minutes for group level conversation. And technology-wise, I'm not even sure in a Zoom webinar. Obviously, you can use the chat, you can use the Q&A, and then Donita, do you know, is it possible to have people like use audio or video, or is it just text?
Nope. It's just text.
Just text. All right. So then, yeah, feel free to throw a question just to us as panelists or to everyone, or yeah, just keep going with your online or your full room chat, talking to each other. What are you seeing, Donita?
I'm seeing a lot of thought happening right now. You know, John and I have been talking about this for a very long time, and I have to say every time we have a discussion or have a webinar or breakout room, I think it's fascinating that I discover something new in myself and in the framework. So I hope that's happening for you all as well.
And what I'm throwing in the chat is this first link on the screen here. What we're hoping is that this was experiential and as immersive as we could make it in this technology, and with the Zoom fatigue and online fatigue that you might likely be feeling. Yeah, we wanted it to have some impact, have some emotion, have some progress for each one of you and for all of us. And if you're interested to do more of that, then yes, as you can imagine, part of doing this webinar was because we've got a nearly full 5-day workshop where we will be doing a deep dive with, frankly, nothing but immersive practice into conversational leadership. So that link is on the screen, but in case that's not clickable, let me put it in the chat. If you'd like immersive practice and real-time feedback from a group, here's the link.
Tony asks, how do we set up conversations between two other people, not ourselves included? Sometimes others need to be talking.
Yeah, fun one. Part of me would say with that use of self, who am I to have any answer? But the thoughts that come through me are, what is your part in that conversation? So you're aware of it. What part of it do you own and not own? What impact is it having on you right now that the conversation hasn't happened yet? That would all be the beginning of use of self. I don't know, Donita, where does your mind, heart, body go?
I think, for me, if I'm seeing that there's conflict or just something that needs to be spoken between others, as John said, I would look to myself first. What is it that is disturbing to me? What is it that is creating a disturbance in the force, in my own force, that needs to be addressed? And then I can take responsibility to say, this is how I'm feeling because of this situation. Can you help me? And that perhaps then becomes, it maybe then includes you in the conversation. But I think it's definitely like I would not advocate for y'all need to talk. And then Brant has a question. With the COVID scenario, age groups are impacted more than with others. For example, the younger generation is used to virtual everything, and older ones are used to the face-to-face. For me, all of this virtual interaction is more of an aid or vice. To some, this is a way of life. Yeah. It's hard. It's hard to switch. And one of the things that sort of blew my mind was this idea that a lot of knowledge is held in the ages between 45 and 65, and a lot of the manipulation of knowledge happens between the 25 and 45, and then also much younger groups as well. In that 45 to 65 area, most people are in a place in their lives where they feel confident, where they feel like they know what they're doing, and then all of a sudden you have to learn a new system. And if you're not a systems thinker, that can be really, really demoralizing. And so there's, I will find the nearest 12-year-old child and be like, here, help me figure this out. I don't know what I'm doing. Or I'll find a 21-year-old and they will help me. And part of it is admitting that you're not at the top of your game as far as this particular thing is concerned.
And Donita, a potentially sensitive one that might be a great place for us to start making this real. Anonymous attendee just posted in the Q&A, as a young woman in a male-dominated department, how do you engage in conversation with the management and leaders to ensure being heard and valued? Do you mind speaking to that? Yeah.
So I've faced this very thing myself. In some areas, mentorship is a huge thing. If you can find a mentor external to the organization who can help you navigate that, that's one great way. Community is tantamount to that. I have a group outside of my work in which I can talk about those things and get ideas from people about how to raise it. Sometimes the question, though, is, or sometimes the only thing is, keep your head down until you can find a slightly less privileged or racist organization, which is the sad truth for many people of color, many young people, when their voices aren't allowed to be in the room.
So much we could say on that one. So yeah, thank you for the question and the reaction, and being aware of my white American male. Part of me doesn't want to add and just hold your space there, Donita. And yet the one thing I will say is that that there is male work to be done in that question as well. So yeah, I will continue to do my part to work with men to be more aware of those things. And that takes us right to the top of the hour. How do we wrap? Donita, Eric, anybody?
Yeah, unless there's any other questions from chat. Maybe one more to probably wrap up. Here's a good one.
I hear John speaking up as another white American male, so thank you, John. Let's do our part.
And I'll just say thank you to the participants. I will hopefully see your faces someday, either on Zoom or in real life. But thanks for the questions and for the really lively discussion in the chat. We couldn't get to everything in there, but there's some real wonderful thinking and questioning in there. So thank you for letting us think some more and speak to you about this.
I guess we'll stop sharing and pause there. A big thank you from me as well.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Go out and converse.
There you go. Perfect.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Have a good day. Thank you, Donita.
Thank you.
Great to see you. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, bye, bye. Bye.